Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming today to our London Climate Week webinar. We've put something together that we hope is really practical. We're going to whiz through it today. We're going to talk about 3 different SMEs, 3 sectors, and 12 months of climate action and what that actually has looked like. We're going to do as much as we can in terms of warts and all, and there's time for questions at the end, but we'll try and whistle through this in about 30 minutes. And then kick off with any questions you have. We'll turn off the recording, so it's a bit more of an open forum for that. So I've got the clicker. So today we are going to talk about these 3 businesses that we've worked with. We can't air their dirty laundry. We want to tell you what they're really doing. So we've anonymised them as far as we can. So yeah, because we want to give you the warts and all. So why they started doing things on climate sustainability, what they did first, what it cost, what changed, what mistakes they made, what they could have done better, and then Q&A at the end. So we'll turn the recording off for that. So just a really brief introduction. So I'm Rhonda Allen. I'm an ex-chartered accountant. I'm from Australia, so I know all about this heat, apparently, although we're not set up for it here. I have a background in finance, supply chain, and moved through different businesses, but I've worked with small businesses all the way to mega multi-corporates.
Yep. So I'm Nick Riley. My background was more UK SMEs, very much in the construction, infrastructure, market sectors, and I used to run the businesses. And I think that's something as Sustainable X we try and focus on the owner's perspective and try and keep things practical and pragmatic.
Yeah, so we co-founded Sustainable X over 6 years ago, well, nearly 6 years ago. So we're practical, pragmatic consultants. We try and tell it as it is and be straight shooters. Since we started, we worked with over 450 businesses, and we've worked across 30 different sectors. Everything's very interesting, and there's so many different challenges, but so much great progress as well. Won multiple awards, and at Sustainable X, it's sort of we've bucketed what we do into 3 different things. A Sustainable X, we're a consultancy, so we help you move along the journey, give you the right priorities, help manage risk, get you a certification if you need it, advise the board, do training. We have a team of sustainable experts that really go into the detail, whether it's an EPR, DE&I, social value, something for you. But we also have a shift program, which is our retained service. So if you're not in the business of doing a big project, shift might be for you, where we help you build your program, but help you on a little and often basis to build capacity internally. So that's a bit about us.
Okay, so just very quickly, bit of scene second. I'm sure there's lots of very knowledgeable people in the call. But we just wanted to set the terminology. So when we talk about sustainability, we talk about it in the broadest sense. So using the Sustainable Development Goals as a reference, we're looking at both the environmental topics, the people topics, and the economic topics. And climate action hits them all to some extent, but we'll very much focus on the environmental topics within these case studies as we go.
So climate action, when we talk about climate action, it's one part of the whole sustainability goals. So there's 17 goals. This is one part. But when we think about climate action, it is everything a business is doing to reduce their impact. Typically, that's you measure carbon footprint as a measurement, but there's all sorts of things you can do in terms of innovation and engagement, talking to suppliers, communicating with customers. All these things are building climate action results. But you can't forget risk and managing your climate risk so you don't cause more negative harm to our environment. Oh, I am the clicker. One of the aspects, and just a terminology, carbon footprint has got 3 scopes. You might all be familiar with this, but just to make sure, it's got scope 1 and 2, which are things you can control, typically in your fleet, any of your owned premises, all sits in climate in scope 1 and 2. Easy to measure typically. Scope 3 has 15 categories. It's all those things that are indirect, supply outside your control, direct control. Typically, scope 3 is difficult to manage, and typically it represents somewhere between 70 and 90% of your whole carbon footprint. So people usually tackle scope 1 and 2 first, and then they move on to scope 3. It's trickier, challenging, and it's tricky for everyone, even if the big boys, the Unilevers, and the big companies.
Yeah, and from a climate action perspective, all the topics rest in this uncomfortable area where you have to influence people that you don't have control over, and that's a challenge across these case studies.
So today we're going to focus on the E, or the climate action piece, just so that's a small part, but super important.
Okay, so we're looking at three businesses, three very different journeys, stories, backgrounds. So the first one, financial and professional services business, was already a B Corp before we even engaged with them, and they're investor backed.
A manufacturing and distribution company. They have a product, manufacture a product, distribute a product, and they wanted to look at circular economy, but it was a management buyout when we came in there. So they had a completely different business case and business angle for why they were doing this.
And the final one's in the pharmaceutical distribution space, and they are very much in the supply chain of the NHS. So a lot of pressure coming from the NHS to remain competitive and satisfy their tender requirements. But they're also private equity backed, and their investors cared as well. So very different businesses, very different journeys, progress, problems.
So something to be said is the businesses we're going to talk about today already covered all the low-hanging fruit. So that's and most of your businesses and the where you work, your operations will have as well, because these things are good business practices. When I'm talking about low-hanging fruit, I'm thinking about changing your LED lights, sustainable travel policies, you setting up a green team. They're the first things people typically tackle, because it's good business, because it saves money, because it engages your employees. So these things we're going to talk about the things after that today. So these are the things that have been already done. So most businesses aren't standing still.
Okay, so financial professional services, again, we're trying to anonymize this because we are giving some warts and all. So they were already B Corp backed, and they had investors who were quite keen on them being a B Corp and liked that space. So from a business case perspective, the investor piece was really important. So retaining those investors important to the business, and potentially in the longer term attracting new investors, being a sustainable operation in their sector made them attractive to different investors. Also, quite a war for talent in their space, and being an ethical business was helping them succeed in that war for talent. So employees liked the fact that they were a B Corp, liked the fact that they were demonstrably ethical. And the final piece of the picture was they have regulators who were absolutely starting to ask some very difficult questions around what they're doing to understand and address climate risk. So that was a big driver.
We always start with the business case because we want businesses to have a business angle into why they're making change. And this is, a key for, you don't want to waste resource on doing something that's going to benefit your business. But if you can tick a climate action box as well and achieve theirs, a bonus.
Yeah. And that's often because there's cynics on the board. And if you don't have the leadership behind it, it tends to get dropped.
Yeah. And some of these topics are really not very exciting and put people off. So it's important to know why you're doing it for a business. So whistling through, and we're going to build in these a little bit more detail, is what they did. So they were already a B Corp, but is that the start or the finish? So we'll talk about that. And if you don't know B Corp, it's a certification you can get. There's 3,000 B Corps or more, I think, in the UK. It is a really nice sustainability badge. It gives you some governance. We'll talk briefly about that. What they did first, after they got B Corp, then what were they doing in that next 12 months? What their biggest cost was, and I think we'll probably highlight this is one of the big watch outs, is recruitment. What it changed and climate action, how they moved through that, and what happened in terms of internal and external comms, and how they progressed and where they are now. So just whistle through this. So B Corp, was this the destination? You often think, oh, I've achieved this badge. Now, whether that's EcoVadis, SEDEX recognition, or ISO or B Corp, anything, is it the destination or is it the final point? That for this business, they recognised that this was just the start. They were already doing good things. B Corp, when they achieved B Corp, was a point system. It wasn't a huge leap for them to get to a B Corp status. They were already quite a sustainable organisation and doing great things socially with their community. They're well governed because they're a financial institution and have FCA requirements. So this became a beginning point rather than an end. They got the B Corp badge and then they realised they actually needed to progress and do more. So in terms of climate action, it was it drove them even harder and harder. So it was an important one for them.
So just they had their green team, ESG team, and they got the B Corp, and there was a little bit of, okay, what next? Where do we go? Because it's not obvious from the framework what happens next. And with their ESG team, lots of good, very capable, very capable people, lots of intelligence in the room, but nobody with a sustainability qualification, background, education, experience, other than having been through that process. So they were a little bit uncertain about where to go. So they recognized they could do with some input to tell them where to focus next and what to do and what not to do.
They also recognized that they had a lot of regulations coming their way. There was climate risk assessments. They're highly regulated. The market's moving. There was key measurements, especially in Scope 3 and financed emissions for them. B Corp requires maintenance, and they needed to recruit. Now, this is probably what they found the hardest and most difficult thing. Finding someone with enough gravitas to talk to the board, finding someone that has the skill set that they need, finding someone who can slot right in and understand the broad breadth of topic certifications, risk, and everything they needed was really, really challenging. And I think they found this the hard way. This is something that would be their biggest expense and watch out is they didn't get the right person the first time. And therefore, as you know, when you're recruiting different individuals, it's not just the cost of replacement and the recruitment, it's the training out time to get somebody organised. So they lost quite a lot of time on this recruitment piece. So something to really think about if you are thinking about recruitment, getting the right person at the right time with the skills. In terms of the cost for them to progress in their climate action. And anything they've done is external engagement, and that costs money. Consultancy costs money. So there was a cost there. The biggest cost for them was their lumpy, bumpy, difficult challenge on FTE recruitment and getting the right person. Absolutely, a huge challenge for them and costly. They needed mentorship for the individual was in a department of one. And they didn't know where that person should, the ESG person or the sustainability person should recruit to. So they got them some external membership. That was no cost, actually. They came with their membership. They're part of a membership organisation and they offer lots of mentorship programs. So that came. But in terms of educating their board and upskilling and up-leveling and investing in time, huge amount of time, internal resource to get that done, and especially board and exec time, which is hugely valuable.
And I think, as a highly regulated business, actually putting public targets out there, that takes a lot of signing off, and the board want a lot of understanding. So there's quite a significant amount of education to put them in a place to back some of these targets. So in terms of what actually happened and what worked, that initial exercise of engaging with the ESG team and doing a materiality assessment, or if you're not familiar with that, it's prioritization of the topics where they can move the dial and where some pain could come if they don't address it, was the most effective thing. So that created a short list. So B Core, if you're unfamiliar with it, lots of topics, and in its former guise, you just used to try and get as many points across all the topics as possible. So it's go, 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 we'll do everything we can. From a stronger way to go is, where can we have an impact as an organization? What are the most important topics? And they did that, and climate action came out really strongly as an area where the regulators cared. If they didn't address it, it could hurt their business. They were lacking data. So this was one of the big focus areas. And we then got into, okay, so if it is a focus area, how do we get some benchmarks in place? And once we have benchmarks, then we can start to create targets. The board can sign that off, and we can start actioning the plans to make those things happen. So we went through all those processes. And on the climate side of things, hard. Because Ronnie mentioned the scope 3, a big aspect of a lot of financial service businesses is they do not have control over what their customers do, but those financed emissions that their customers create is the biggest part of their footprint, and where they've got a bit of influence, but they lack control.
The things that didn't work very well is FTE hire was the wrong profile, and they couldn't get that right. Department of One, they were isolated. They couldn't make progress. So there was a lot of that stalled a lot of their ability to achieve results. But everything in terms of measuring their climate achievement in a year, I would say almost nothing on carbon, because the year one was a massive investment in upskilling, getting the right measurements in, measuring scope 3, getting financed emissions. It was just an investment year. It was a bit of a fallow year. So this is where climate action is more than just carbon footprint. It's all those other intangible upskilling, up-leveling, understanding risk piece. So this is where the year one, they didn't see a result in that. In pure metrics, but they saw a lot of investment in time. And the ESG committee was a bit stalled because they needed that expertise around the table to move on. So that's so some wins and a lot of building on something for the future for them. Click on. Business 2 is manufacturing distribution, and they're an interesting business. They have a completely different business case. They were focused on cost. It was a management buyout, relatively small business, and cost was really important to them. So they needed to improve their bottom line, and they wanted to do it through cost initiatives. They also knew their product. They had a environmental social conscience. They knew their product probably wasn't the greatest thing they had that was benefiting the environment. So there was something weighing heavily on the manager owner's shoulders there. But they had an idea they wanted to turn into something else. So they had a nugget of a concept that could be something for their business that relieved this conscience.
Yeah, so when they kicked off, they had a team, an ESG team, as most people do, and they were starting to think about their environmental impact, but they hadn't put any metrics on it, and they were doing all the low-hanging fruit that you would expect.
And this is a 48-month. We put this as a 4-year journey, so it's not anything that's massively being able to achieve. The next business case, you'll see massive achievement in 1 year, but this has been a slow burn for this business.
Yeah, so we got involved, and again went through that prioritization exercise to really focus in, and the climate impact of their products and their distribution of the products was one of the big impacts that came out of there. So they started to look at that and work out how they could start to measure their carbon footprint. They started with scope 1 and 2, started engaging their suppliers. It's a long journey. So when they first go out to the suppliers, a lot of the feedback is, what are you talking about? They don't have it. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got some very large suppliers, and they're very much kind of a tiny part of their distribution space. And how do they influence them? How do they actually engage with them to get the data that they needed?
So year three, of course, cost was a huge issue here. They'd understood their scope three at the same time. So this was where two missions collided at once, and they realised that if they reduced their service to their customers, instead of daily deliveries, they did twice a week. It massively saved their cost. Provided a little bit of challenge on the customer side because it was a change for them, but they went out selling the carbon story and saying this is part of their sustainability initiative. They want to reduce carbon. So it made a huge climate impact on their carbon and a massive cost savings as well. They also looked at moving premises. So these things are slow, but they understood them. They were big business decisions, slow to do, but had massive climate benefit as well. So year four, moved to a 3PL, economies of scale. They could manage their transportation and costs much more efficiently than in-house. They moved offices as well, so that changed the transportation closer to public transport links. So employees, once again, change, but had a massive cost saving, but also carbon impact. And this is where they really started to develop their new product concept. Back from that nugget of an idea and that little acorn in that it was a more efficient carbon, more efficient, more environmentally friendly product, and it started to get developed. So that's
And it's
sort of where
also
we lead
probably
into.
worth noting on the climate risk. There's a consideration that their market might shift and start to require low carbon products, and that could have put them out of business. So meanwhile, they had developed and enhanced their product range, so they had low carbon options for the customers. So that was just mitigating that risk. They weren't being asked, but they were conscious if that was a fast change in the market, they wanted to be ready.
And you see all businesses doing that. You see everyone, there's eco ranges, right? Packaging company has an eco range. They're testing the market. This company wanted an eco range, but it didn't exist anywhere in the market. So they needed to find it or develop it. So this is there's some risk associated here. And this is where we're talking about the risk and reward. They needed to create a market, educate customers with this new product that didn't exist, or a new alternative that they either needed to create or buy in, but massive reward, not just on the climate side, but massive potential market reward if they were perceived to be the leaders and could be the leaders. So in terms of the risk, they took on a lot of risk as a business. There was no demand for this product, or no market. Like there wasn't anything out there. They wanted to sell something, but the market didn't want it, and they perceived it to be yet. They needed to communicate this whole new product. I mean, we're all very familiar with eco ranges in all of our current products, but in a B2B world, it was an innovative solution, but it had high upfront cost. It required storage, it required reprocessing, it required a team to manage it, communication and making the market happen, like a lot, marketing there and market development. So risk on the climate action side.
Yeah, and the reason we put the plastic bottles up there is just as the example. So they were trying to create a circular economy product there, and we're all familiar with plastic bottles, but the clients didn't have a perception that they wanted a recycled plastic bottle. That just wasn't a concept that existed in their marketplace. So the upside for them was when they went to the market and they're going, yeah, so what? Actually, that might look a bit different color. I'm not sure our customers would want it. Geez, they've put in all this infrastructure, all this investment to create this solution. Nobody wanted it. Well, they found a new market. So they went out and they got a different place to sell it, and that turned out to be successful, and that's enabled them to break even in the 12 months and sustain the solution and the product. And now they're seeing the market starting to shift. So they're starting to get inquiries for this because that behavior change is starting to happen. So they can see that the tilt and the risk and the reward might start to go heavily in their favor.
The thing I love is they're selling the product. Each product range, they're talking about the carbon of each product. So they can be a climate action solution for someone else because they're offering a really low carbon option. So as the market develops, they're putting themselves in the right position here. So
And all this work and engagement has upskilled the whole organization. So they understand the language, the sales team's been trained on the carbon footprinting. So their skill level on all these climate risks is quite high, and it's enabled them to set targets within the business plan and within individuals' goals as well. So that's really getting quite mature.
So what did it cost? All the infrastructure, they save money in the end, but as we know, there's a bit of an upfront. The first year cost, but ongoing, much better for the business to have this lower cost, lower carbon, but lower cost as well. Product launch has cost money. Had to set up the business. It's just at break even, so there's still a cost there. But hopefully the investment will pay off. That's the desire, of course. Consultancy, measurement, carbon footprint, deep diving, understanding product carbon footprint. This isn't free normally, so there's some cost there. But the biggest thing was being the delivery consolidation. Absolutely made a huge amount of savings there, shipping to customers. So typically we don't want to upset our customers and have a reduced service, but this has been a massive saving for them and a huge impact on their carbon footprint and climate.
And even talking to some of the customers down the track, it's actually been positive for them because it's made them organize themselves differently, and they've become more efficient on the back of it as well. But it's almost forced them to make that shift.
So carbon footprinting at the product level, at the individual scope level, has worked for them because they're using it as a tool to sell. They're using it as an opportunity rather than talk cost. They're talking about it as proof of why they're doing something. Finding this unexpected market just by talking about what they're doing and getting it out there, they've found new profit centers that they didn't even expect, but it's really working for them. So it's being openly inquisitive. They shifted from a product to a solution. So they're talking around circular. There's a few buzzy words in there. And sustainability is now in their business targets. So they're driven by it. The sales teams are driven by it. And they're really anchoring themselves on this future result because they see the regulations coming in the sectors that they work in. So then they're part of the solution. So that's really been positive for them.
What was not so good was, well, if the core market had inquiries from day one, that would clearly have been a better result. So that was a bit of a kick in the teeth. Part of that was actually the sales team weren't up to speed. So we had to put some effort and action into upskilling the sales team so they were able to talk about it in the right way and start those climate conversations with customers who might not know much about it at all. So that did take quite a bit of upskilling and funding. So they've done a lot of R&D, a lot of development work, all in their own pocket, and they were looking for funding. They were looking for opportunities to get that money in. Hard, and even when they found it, hard to then get the funding. So a lot of upfront cost, and there was no guaranteed return on it. So fair play to them. That was a bold shout. So the next business is pharmaceutical distribution. So an element of manufacturing, but a lot of goods coming in and being shipped around. So private equity backed business. It's just changed hands in terms of the private equity owners when we got involved with them. And there were multiple pressures converging on them. There was regulation, some taxes coming in, but the big one was this NHS. So their business case was their biggest customer, NHS, absolutely cares about this. If you're not familiar with it, they've got a process called Evergreen, where you have to submit your impacts year on year, and the demands of that are increasing year on year. So they're asking for more and higher levels of competence and progress as they go. And their new private equity owners required reporting as well. So they care about their portfolio and the climate impact of their portfolio. So they were asking for a lot of data too, inconveniently slightly different data from what the NHS is asking.
What sort of also hit these guys at the same time is regulations on EPR.
So that's extended producer responsibility.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's a packaging tax effectively.
So just as a reminder, climate action includes measuring carbon footprint, but it includes working with suppliers and doing all these different activities in climate. For this business, we're just going to share it. They did all of these things, and they've really achieved, by doing a lot of these things, they've really achieved carbon savings, and we want to show you what they've done in 12 months, and talk about the climate risk that they're going to associate as well. But yeah, it's a full scope on climate action.
Yeah, so the headline, so a lot of work done in the build up to 2025, but when they did the detailed carbon analysis, ignoring the embodied energy in the products they buy, which is a big deal, but they've little influence on their transportation out to customers, was a big deal that was within their control. And that was a big spend area and a big carbon area. So their big outcome was this 30% reduction in their overall carbon footprint, and more in terms of specifically looking at the transportation piece. And we'll talk to you about how they achieved that. So they were a diverse business. Lots of little businesses had come together and been acquired as part of this private equity organization. So pretty complex, and lots of goods moving within the different businesses from warehouse to warehouse, so as it could go out to different customers with different badges. So a big consolidation exercise, looking at where's the best place logistically for us to have hubs in the country, and they decided on actually consolidating down to 2 hubs in the end, with very different end customer bases. And that consolidation made massive savings. There was lots of internal transit going on, but it also made a massive reduction in the journeys out to customers, because they put them in strategic places based on their biggest current customers and projected future customers. So this has been a massive deal for them as a business, and yeah, great climate action. So how did they get there? And part of the process in the build up to all this was lots of engagement with supply chains, lots of engagement with their transport supply chain, particularly whilst they don't use 3PL, the freight businesses they work with, a lot of expertise in the piece, so they could use their knowledge and tap into it. And they really focused in on those biggest key suppliers and prioritize the engagement with them to help inform these decisions, so they could get the best result. And that double materiality assessment, when we talked about the prioritization piece again, when we started on day one, that was the thing we did. And from a climate action perspective, this was the big thing that came out that was within their control, because actually their product climate impact is probably more significant, but it's so highly regulated that's harder to move the dial on. So the shorter term focus was this. Another issue for them is fugitive emissions. So temperature sensitive products, some of these things. So in their warehousing facilities, they have cold rooms, and they also have fleet. That in the transportation fleet is refrigerated. So lots of challenges there. And they did have leaks from some of these older sites on the refrigerant systems. So in one of their hubs, they put in a new system with a low risk refrigerant gas in there, and there's been no leaks, and they're not expecting any leaks because it's a well-maintained system. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, and I think fugitive emissions, one little leak just blows your carbon footprint out of the water. Yeah. It's got such a massive carbon impact. So it's nasty. So
nasty stuff. Yep.
One of the things on climate action, and really important for this business, was climate risk. Their investors really cared about the risk. They wanted them to understand that, like, everything around climate to be understood, because they didn't want to be dealing with any future topics. This included regulation and penalty risk. This is where the EPR came in, and the packaging. They needed to have all of this lily white. They couldn't just fudge it. They wanted to be perfect. They needed to be perfect. They wanted to reduce their risk, and they needed to include all of the data that they had. But the other big thing is these temperature sensitive products, and this wig's a classic example of it, can't be transported in this sort of in these conditions. So we saw this in 2022 with the other heat rise, and we really need to be thinking about our facilities, our transportation, our employees, everything in the climate risk assessment to understand how we can transport this
Yeah,
stuff
because
with heat, or
one of
flood,
their
or cold.
transports, yeah, one of
Mm,
their transport suppliers, the fleet they had was only rated to cope with 27 degrees ambient temperature. After an hour at a higher temperature than that, it wasn't man enough for the job. And they
yeah,
couldn't
so
quote on that in 2022, and their contracts required them to distribute these drugs. So a massive risk, massive deal. So they needed to address that in their supply chain decisions.
So in terms of what it really cost this company and what this progress, so they haven't added any new headcount, but there has been some cost in upskilling. So there's been some internal capacity building and development so that their systems, their people, their processes are robust and ready to go to manage all of these climate actions and requirements. Um, the logistics project, you saw the savings of 59% of carbon savings, massive investment, ongoing future savings. This was a business decision. We love the climate impact as well, but this was the best thing for the business. EPR and taxation and regulation penalties and costs, not penalties. It's just an ongoing. Can't do anything about that. That's an ongoing cost. They need to be compliant. It's much worse if you're not compliant. So it's better to take to get your data sorted out. And there was some costs there in terms of retrofitting their systems and master data systems. So they did need expertise on what fields to start implementing and what to ask suppliers so that they could automatically capture this data for their future submissions.
So in terms of what worked, well, the consolidation piece, I mean, that's a big business win anyway you look at it. The fact that they've not added headcount on they haven't got specific ESG staff in there. It's been absorbed into other people's roles, and they have been upskilled as well. So that's good. It gives them resilience, which is good. And they're really, from a submissions perspective on the regulation side, they're really strong. They're confident in their data. It's auditable. They're accurate. Investors are happy that risk is addressed. And also on tender submissions, they're confident. They're scoring good points when these things go in there in the NHS Evergreen. They're highly rated in terms of the different levels, so that's all good. Downside, on the data side of things, it would have been so much easier if that was already there. So you can't do enough to build in some of these fields and systems to capture data early on. If they'd had that capacity and functionality, it would have been so much easier. That was a little bit painful for them. On the regulation side of things, these submission dates, when they first started, coming every 6 months, that felt a bit faster than what they were used to, because there's a lot of data to pull together. So that was a little bit more of a organization overhead than what they had thought. And scope 3 is hard. So there's so many aspects of their supply chain, which is other manufacturers, and they're importing the goods. How do they reduce the emissions of those? How do they influence that reduction? And they're for some of them, they're a big customer. For others, they're just a really small part of their distribution chain, so they're not really engaging with them. So scope 3, when you've got 70 to 90% of your emissions in that area, and it's such a big climate action metric, but you've got very little info. You might just have concern, might have a little bit of influence, and you certainly haven't got control. So having addressed the low-hanging fruit, how do you move the dial on those things? And that's a big challenge.
I suppose that this is our last slide, second to last slide. A couple of things we would suggest or think around. Keep climate action as the broader picture. Remember that, measured by carbon typically, but there's lots of other things to be done. And prioritise and focus on maximise what you can do. Some of our clients haven't improved their carbon measure year on year because they're getting more accurate, and so the numbers are going up, but they understand it better. So build that data in, gather that information from the get-go, so you know that you've got more accurate data, you know who to ask, you know what levers to pull, and you're remembering the whole picture. When you made some quick wins, we've said even although it's not quick, but moving logistics providers is not a quick win, but it's not a low-hanging fruit either. Your progress needs influence. So you need to be moving, changing, asking your suppliers, talking to your employees, talking to your customers, and moving everyone along the journey. There's a lot of influence in climate action.
And potentially collaborating as well. I think looking at industry groups and working with other people in your sector.
And the business case can arrive from unexpected directions. So keep an eye on where it might come. Horizon scanning is really, really a valuable tool. Look at what competitors are doing. Look at what direction your customers are going in as well. So we are open to the floor. This is our QR code to connect with us on LinkedIn. We won't spam you. We won't, but we'd love to connect with you, and if you ever need us, you can find us there. We'll stop recording, and we're open to any questions if you have any. But thank you so much for coming along and listening, and we hope it's been useful.